does a nation built on law and freedom turn its gaze inward, deploying the same war machinery once used in Kabul and Fallujah onto its own streets? In August 2025, that question stopped being theoretical. At 4:00 a.m., engines roared across America. Convoys rolled through Los Angeles, Houston, and Miami as DEA agents in tactical armor moved under a single codename, Operation Silver Veil. Within 72 hours, over 3,000 suspects tied to the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels were in custody, a sweep unlike any in U.S. history. The flashing lights that flooded the freeways weren't just about narcotics. They marked the dawn of a new doctrine. The images were staggering. Armored trucks outside Long Beach docks, helicopters circling Phoenix suburbs, raids unfolding from California to Connecticut. Containers marked medical supplies, cracked open to reveal 7 to 400 kilograms of synthetic powder, 480 kilograms of concentrated chemicals, and 420 firearms hidden in false compartments. Federal command centers glowed red as maps filled with digital pins spreading like an infection across the continental United States. To many, it looked like victory. To the DEA, it was confirmation that America could still strike globally coordinated, lethal precise. According to data shared with Reuters and BBC News, the agency traced identical cartel stash houses across 23 field divisions, all linked by the same financial network and chemical suppliers in China and India. Each one operated under legitimate import firms, cycling narcotics and weapons through small American towns unnoticed. The raid shattered that illusion. But as the arrests piled up, the deeper meaning began to take shape. This wasn't merely a law enforcement action. It was the execution of a new presidential directive, a national campaign to reassert control over a borderless enemy. President Trump's administration had framed it as a consequence-based enforcement doctrine, a strategy designed to treat transnational cartels as foreign combatants. For the first time in modern U.S. history, narcotics operations and national defense had merged under one chain of command. Strategically, the move reflected a global trend, the blurring of military and domestic security. As DW reported, Western democracies now face hybrid threats that defy jurisdiction, criminal cartels behaving like insurgencies, cyber criminals acting as state proxies, and private militias crossing borders. The United States, once the architect of counterinsurgency abroad, was now applying that playbook at home. The echoes could be heard worldwide. In Eastern Europe, Ukraine was using similar tactics to intercept arms networks feeding Russia's war machine. In the Middle East, Israel and Iran's shadow war mirrored the same struggle: covert logistics, proxy funding, deniable violence. Even in Asia, Defense News noted China's use of criminal triads and cyber smuggling mirrored cartel-style networks, weaponizing economics and corruption alike. And yet beneath the headlines, the human toll grew heavier. Overdose deaths in the US reached 150 per day, shattering records. Families in towns from Maine to Arizona watched their children vanish to synthetic addiction. For them, the war wasn't measured in kilograms seized, but in lives consumed. The question haunting America was no longer about how to win the war on drugs, but whether it could be won without losing the very principles that defined it. How far should a democracy go before the tools of protection become weapons of control? It began with a stroke of a pen in the Oval Office. In early 2025, President Donald Trump signed an executive order that redrew the map of American law enforcement. The document reclassified major Mexican cartels, including Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation, as foreign terrorist organizations. For decades, the war on drugs was a domestic issue. Overnight, it became a counter-terror campaign. Trump's directive unlocked powers once reserved for wars abroad. The Pentagon gained legal authority to share real-time intelligence, conduct reconnaissance, and coordinate operations alongside the DEA and Homeland Security. If the cartels behave like insurgents, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said during a briefing quoted by Reuters, then we will treat them accordingly. We will hunt them down like we did Al-Qaeda. The language was deliberate. America's most violent criminal networks were now seen as strategic threats to national security. The move drew sharp reactions. Supporters hailed it as the long overdue recognition of a global crisis. Critics, including analysts cited by The Guardian and DW, warned that blurring the lines between policing and warfare risked eroding constitutional boundaries. Soldiers were not trained for domestic streets. Yet by summer, uniformed military advisors were embedded in task forces from El Paso to Miami. The line between law enforcement and combat had faded under the desert sun. In Los Angeles, the DEA's war room became the nerve center epicenter of this transformation. Satellite imagery fed directly from U.S. Northern Command guided tactical raids in real time. The FBI's counterintelligence division monitored cartel communications once considered outside its jurisdiction. ICE and Coast Guard units conducted synchronized maritime seizures under the same mission patch. This is not policing, said one official in Defense News. This is operational warfare just without the front lines. Strategically, the directive mirrored a global recalibration of American power. Washington was shifting from reaction to preemption. The same defend-forward doctrine once applied to cyber and maritime defense was now being tested inside U.S. borders. The Pentagon framed it as a necessity. Cartels had evolved beyond criminality. They were now hybrid organizations with intelligence arms, drone fleets, and global banking connections. This evolution forced a painful question upon the Western alliance. Could NATO partners follow the same path? DW and Jane's Defense Weekly noted that European intelligence agencies were studying the American model closely, fearing that North African and Balkan smuggling networks could soon resemble mini cartels with terrorist capabilities. As the US militarized its anti-narcotics doctrine, allies watched cautiously, torn between the need for security and the fear of setting dangerous precedents. Meanwhile, the cartels adapted fast. Drone surveillance, encrypted communications, and cyber laundering became their new arsenal. Mexican field commanders shifted operations inland, spreading production away from coastal hubs. US forces could shut down a port, but not an ideology driven by profit and despair. In an interview with Al Jazeera, a former DEA analyst described it bluntly: "Every time we strike, they fragment and multiply. You can't bomb poverty. You can't arrest desperation." As operations expanded, so did public unease. The militarization of American streets reignited the old debate: how much freedom should be sacrificed for safety? Civil liberties groups questioned whether domestic surveillance authorized under anti-terror statutes could one day target ordinary citizens. The White House insisted the measures were temporary, a wartime necessity for a borderless enemy. But history offered a warning. Every emergency leaves a mark. The Patriot Act had once promised to fight terrorism abroad, yet its shadow lingered across decades of domestic surveillance. Now a new doctrine was emerging, one that fused counterterrorism, narcotics enforcement, and homeland defense into a single machine. It was powerful, it was effective, but was it controllable? In Ukraine, a similar transformation unfolded under wartime law, where intelligence agencies gained sweeping authority to monitor domestic dissent in the name of national security. Israel's Mossad blurred civilian and military intelligence during its shadow war with Iran, and China, under the guise of anti-corruption, deployed military-grade surveillance to suppress internal crime networks. The global pattern was unmistakable: nations turning inward, using external threats to justify internal control. For America, the warning was clear. A war born to save communities might one day redefine them. As the drones hovered and armored trucks rolled across quiet suburbs, one chilling question lingered in every neighborhood: how long before the homeland itself becomes a battlefield? Behind every raid, every flashing siren, and every mugshot lay a deeper truth. The cartels weren't just criminal gangs. They were multinational corporations built on logistics, chemistry, and cold efficiency. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel and the Sinaloa Cartel had redefined the business of death. Their empire ran like an industrial network. Chemical precursors from China and India arrived at Mexico's Pacific ports Manzanillo and Lázaro Cárdenas, labeled as industrial solvents or cleaning agents. Inside, according to Reuters investigations, were the raw materials of America's deadliest addiction, fentanyl and methamphetamine. These shipments flowed to hidden super labs buried in Jalisco and Michoacán, where chemists, some trained abroad, produced synthetic opioids powerful enough to kill millions. From there, the distribution chain crossed the border with chilling precision. Tractor trailers, refrigerated produce trucks, and even couriers disguised as tourists carried the product north. Every kilo worth $4,000 in Mexico could generate over $1 million on US streets once pressed into counterfeit pills, as noted by BBC News. This was capitalism stripped of morality, scalable, efficient, and deadly. Inside Los Angeles International Airport, DEA scanners detected what one agent described to Al Jazeera as ghost cargo containers that appeared clean but carried microscopic residues of synthetic powder. The cartels had perfected invisibility. Using cryptocurrency encrypted logistics apps and compromised customs data, they could bypass border checkpoints without ever crossing them. They built a supply chain that rivals Amazon, said a senior official cited by Jane's Defense Weekly. For Washington, the scale demanded escalation. This wasn't a war on drugs, it was a war on an economic model. The Pentagon began deploying data analytics originally designed for counterterrorism in Afghanistan, mapping financial and chemical routes like insurgent cells. Artificial intelligence tracked patterns between port manifests, shipping insurance, and even social media activity. Every pattern, every number was a lead. Strategically, this marked a new phase in hybrid warfare where economic networks, not armies, defined the battlefield. DW analysts drew comparisons to Ukraine's cyber war with Russia. Both conflicts fought not for territory, but for control of infrastructure. Israel's strikes on Iranian arms depots in Syria followed similar logic: destroy the logistics and the enemy collapses. For the United States, the cartel supply line was its own version of that target map. But the campaign revealed an uncomfortable parallel. In fighting cartels that behaved like corporations, America risked becoming corporate in its response, efficient, remote, and detached from human cost. Raids yielded staggering numbers: $48 million in seized assets, 3,000 arrests, hundreds of guns recovered. Yet overdoses continued to climb, hitting record highs by October 2025. The poison kept flowing, invisible and relentless. The cartels, meanwhile, were evolving. They shifted from smuggling to digital laundering. They built private militias equipped with stolen US rifles and commercial drones modified for reconnaissance. Their leaders hid behind shell companies that donated to legitimate American campaigns, buying influence one handshake at a time. According to The Guardian, investigators found evidence that cartel-linked funds passed through cryptocurrency wallets registered in Delaware, routed through real estate purchases in Nevada and Florida. This wasn't narco-trafficking anymore. It was narco-sovereignty, a shadow state operating inside and alongside the legitimate one. It exploited the same freedoms that made America powerful: open markets, decentralized finance, and a presumption of innocence. And so the question shifted from how do we stop the drugs to how do we dismantle the system that enables them? Because for every lab destroyed in Jalisco, another opened in Colima. For every trafficker jailed in Phoenix, another emerged in Houston. The war was no longer fought with soldiers and smugglers, but with economists, coders, and accountants. In a world where money moves faster than justice, can even the most powerful nation control what it cannot see? The deeper investigators dug, the clearer the pattern became. The cartels had not only mastered chemistry, they had mastered capitalism itself. Deep inside the US Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, analysts traced billions in dirty money flowing through pristine channels, shell corporations, real estate portfolios, and luxury imports that looked indistinguishable from legitimate commerce. Each transaction was a thread in a web of deception. Cash collected in Los Angeles or Houston was reclassified as consulting income wired through front companies in Miami and funneled into cryptocurrency exchanges in Singapore or Hong Kong. By the time it returned to an American bank account, it was clean. What had started as drug money now looked like investment capital, a ghost fortune wearing the mask of legitimacy. Reuters confirmed that US investigators uncovered links between cartel funds and underground Chinese banking syndicates operating in California, a revelation that shook financial regulators. The money wasn't just buying influence, it was infiltrating the system. This is no longer street crime, a Treasury official told The Guardian. This is financial warfare conducted in plain sight. The implications were staggering. Campaign donations, construction contracts, even pension funds showed signs of contamination. Analysts inside FinCEN detected transactions from shell firms later tied to public projects and political donors. Nothing directly illegal, but the convergence was alarming. The cartels had discovered that in America, corruption doesn't require a gun. It only requires paperwork. DW compared the situation to Europe's own money laundering crises, particularly the Baltic scandals that funneled Russian funds into Western banks. There too, regulators found themselves chasing ghosts through layers of offshore ownership. The US was now confronting the same enemy, only this time the money trail led not to Moscow, but to Sinaloa. At the strategic level, the Biden-era notion of follow the money had evolved into Trump's fight the money. Under his administration's executive authority, financial surveillance was expanded beyond traditional banking networks. The Pentagon and Treasury began sharing encrypted intelligence to identify front companies tied to foreign cartels. For the first time, counter-terror finance models once used to track ISIS and Al-Qaeda were turned inward on American soil. The results were dramatic but dangerous. Dozens of US citizens, including small business owners and mid-level investors, found their accounts frozen while investigations unfolded. Civil libertarians warned that unchecked financial enforcement could become a tool of domestic control. The Guardian noted parallels to Israel's sanctions strategy against Iran's shadow networks highly effective but prone to collateral damage among innocents. Globally, the same story repeated itself. Ukraine's Financial Intelligence Service used similar algorithms to intercept Russian smuggling payments disguised as humanitarian aid. China launched what Al Jazeera described as a data war against cross-border crypto networks accused of laundering narcotics profits. The battlefield of 2025 was digital, invisible, automated, and relentless. Yet beneath the strategic brilliance lay a bitter irony. The same openness that fueled America's prosperity, its free markets, its private enterprise, its digital currency boom had become the cartel's camouflage. The fight for national security was colliding with the principles of economic freedom. And for every corrupted transaction exposed, another question followed. How many more remained hidden in the bloodstream of the economy? Families who lost children to synthetic drugs no longer cared about the numbers. To them, every mansion seized in Miami, every frozen crypto wallet was a monument to a system that had looked away too long. The war on drugs had turned into a war for America's financial soul. If power can be bought invisibly and loyalty traded like a stock, can any democracy remain incorruptible? Or has the war on cartels already become a war within the very markets that built the modern world? The headlines came like aftershocks. A sheriff in Florida, 2 border inspectors in California, a federal officer in Texas. Each arrest peeled back another layer of a truth too dark to ignore. The cartels had not only infiltrated America's streets, they had infiltrated its institutions. The first domino fell in early 2025 when FBI agents unsealed a racketeering case against Osceola County Sheriff Marcos Lopez. The charges were explosive. Lopez had allegedly accepted nearly $700,000 in bribes from Sinaloa-linked casino operators protecting their Florida operations while wearing the badge of the law. His partner Krishna Deokaran laundered millions through a chain of internet cafes disguised as entertainment lounges. According to court documents cited by Reuters and Al Jazeera, Lopez promised Deokaran safety under his badge. When investigators confronted him, he still wore his uniform. The scandal detonated across the media. 2 months later, Lopez's estranged wife was arrested for continuing the laundering network under the cover of a cleaning company. The message was clear: the infection had spread. In El Paso, a different form of betrayal surfaced. Customs officer Manuel Perez Jr. was caught allowing vehicles packed with narcotics and migrants to slip through inspection lanes. The Guardian confirmed that over 2 years, Perez earned hundreds of thousands in payoffs, cash hidden in glove compartments, jewelry boxes, even the baby seat of his car. 2 other CBP officers, Jesse Garcia and Diego Bonillo, admitted to using emoji-coded text to direct smugglers towards safe lanes. More than 100 pounds of poison entered the United States through their hands. At San Isidro, the nation's busiest border crossing officers, Farlis Almonte and Ricardo Rodriguez, were charged with taking bribes to wave cars through without inspection. Agents later found $70,000 in cash inside Almonte's apartment and his girlfriend arrested while trying to move the payoff money back to Tijuana. Each story followed the same rhythm: greed, secrecy, and collapse. But the most shocking came from within the agency's own ranks. Former Inspector Leonard Darnell, George, once praised for his spotless record, was convicted of taking nearly $400,000 in bribes. Prosecutors said he wasn't just complicit, he was operational, providing smugglers with surveillance details and clearance schedules. And then came the case of Border Patrol agent Alexander Grindley, accused not of accepting bribes, but of trafficking meth himself while on duty. These were not isolated cases. According to BBC News, the FBI's Public Corruption Unit reported that since 2023, at least 29 law enforcement officers from sheriffs to federal inspectors had been charged with cartel-related crimes. What began as whispers of misconduct became a wave of systemic decay. Strategically, this was catastrophic. Corruption hollowed out America's defensive line from within. Analysts at Jane's Defense Weekly compared the crisis to the early 2000s collapse of Afghan police integrity, where corruption, not combat, broke the mission. Homeland Security's emergency expansion in 2025 had created cracks. The cartels exploited rushed background checks, temporary clearances, and cash incentives tied to performance. The system grew faster than it could safeguard itself. Globally, the parallels were eerie. In Ukraine, intelligence leaks exposed Russian infiltration of local command posts. In Israel, a cyber espionage scandal revealed Iranian bribes aimed at defense contractors. In Southeast Asia, DW reported Chinese triads bribing Coast Guard officers in exchange for safe maritime routes. Corruption, once the side effect of conflict, had become its primary weapon. And for the agents still holding the line, the betrayal cut deeper than any bullet. It's not the enemy that breaks you, one DEA official told Defense News. It's when you realize the enemy was wearing your uniform. The question now gripping Washington wasn't whether the war could be won, but whether the institutions fighting it could survive intact. Each new scandal eroded public faith, each indictment weakened morale, and behind every flashing badge lay a haunting possibility that loyalty itself had a price tag. When those sworn to protect the nation begin selling its security, where does justice go to hide? By the final months of 2025, America's war on the cartels no longer looked like victory. It looked like exhaustion. Washington had celebrated 3,000 arrests, billions in seizures, and the dismantling of major trafficking routes. Yet the quiet rot within its own ranks told another story. Inside Congress, a new phrase began circulating: institutional fatigue. Too many fronts, too few safeguards, too much power flowing through systems that no longer trusted themselves. The DEA's Los Angeles Command Center still glowed with red dots marking past raids, but new ones appeared slower. Investigations into corruption within ICE, CBP, and local departments multiplied, consuming resources once aimed at the enemy. A report leaked to Reuters described internal attrition as the most significant threat to national security, not from smugglers, but from compromised personnel and bureaucratic overload. When your shield begins to crack, one senior intelligence officer told The Guardian, you don't just lose protection, you lose the public's belief that protection still exists. Behind the walls of Capitol Hill, hearings grew tense. Lawmakers questioned whether Trump's consequence-based enforcement directive had stretched the machinery of enforcement beyond its limits. Supporters argued that the doctrine had saved lives, forcing a complacent system to act decisively. Critics countered that it blurred accountability, merging policing, military, and financial enforcement into an uncontrollable hybrid apparatus. Analysts at DW warned that the crisis mirrored other democracies facing internal overreach. In Israel, emergency powers invoked to fight terror had gradually fused with policing authority reshaping civilian oversight. In Ukraine, martial law created similar dilemmas between wartime necessity and post-war democracy. And in China, what began as anti-gang campaigns had evolved into sweeping domestic surveillance justified by national security. The United States, long the world's model of institutional balance, now faced the same moral crossroad. Strategically, the Pentagon viewed the war as unfinished. Intelligence operations continued to trace cartel arms networks into Central America and Europe, while Jane's Defense Weekly reported that Northern Command had begun integrating AI-based threat modeling into domestic security frameworks, effectively militarizing data. Yet even as technology advanced, the trust between citizen and state frayed. Drone patrols and predictive policing tools now scanned border towns once defined by freedom and faith in the rule of law. The human toll deepened. In small towns across the Midwest, overdoses kept rising. In cities like Phoenix and San Diego, residents spoke of checkpoints and surveillance drones as part of daily life. It's starting to feel like a country always preparing for war, one Arizona teacher told BBC News. And still, the cartels adapted, fragmenting into smaller cells that fed on chaos. Inside the agencies, morale broke quietly. Agents questioned each other. Files disappeared. Whistleblowers were silenced under pending investigations. It was a war without front lines and without a clear end. When every success revealed another failure beneath it, victory became an illusion. The final irony, the United States, in trying to destroy the cartels, had begun to mirror them, hierarchical, secretive, and dependent on money and fear to function. The cartels evolved into insurgents, Al Jazeera observed, but America evolved into a fortress. And so as the year closed, one haunting question lingered over Washington's self-declared triumph. What happens when the defenders of justice become prisoners of their own system? Every nation must decide how much freedom it is willing to surrender for the illusion of safety. Every empire must ask what it becomes when the line between power and principle blurs beyond recognition. The flashing lights may fade, the arrests may stop, but the battle for the American soul between control and liberty, fear and faith is far from over. How long can a democracy wage war on itself before it forgets what peace feels like? Operation Silver Veil chronicles the largest anti-cartel crackdown in US history, a campaign that captured $3,000 suspects but exposed deep corruption inside America's security apparatus. Under President Donald Trump's 2025 directive reclassifying cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, the DEA, Pentagon, and Homeland Security merged operations into a national counterinsurgency framework. As synthetic drugs from Mexico and Asia devastated US communities, raids expanded from Los Angeles to Miami, targeting both traffickers and complicit officials. Yet the operation's success revealed systemic decay sheriffs, border agents, and inspectors trading loyalty for cash. Financial forensics uncovered billions laundered through real estate, crypto, and political donations, blurring the line between crime and governance. By year's end, congressional analysts coined a chilling term, institutional fatigue. America's war had turned inward, threatening the very institutions sworn to protect it. As the borders militarized and surveillance deepened, the central question remained: can a democracy defend itself without losing the freedoms